ben Arav Svi Hirsch, Ephraim ben Arav Svi Hirsch, Aditya bas Rav Svi Hirsch, Miriam bas Rav Svi Hirsch, Pesel bas Rav Svi Hirsch, Shalom ben Rav Svi Hirsch, Shlomo Yaakov ben Rav Svi Hirsch, Shmuel ben Rav Svi Hirsch. We also acknowledge the children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren of Toby Perez, Sarah Tova Bas Yisrael Dove, Charlie Geldenstein, and Sam Levine in memory of Ramona Levine, Rachel Mata Bas Asher, friends of Nina Moinister, Nechama Asna Bas Yitzchak.
Zeb, don't take that milk. That milk is spoiled. Do the next one.
May I go on? Friends of Stephen Avigdor, Simcha Melech ben Meir Lev Halevi, friends of Marcy Kurtz in memory of her great niece Leah Bracha. David and Mendel Cheslow in memory of his father Moshe ben Reuven Mordechai. Susan and Reuven Zev Podolsky in memory of her father Simcha Bunim ben Yeshua and her mother Chaya Bas Avram Dov. Haran and Mel Haller in memory of her father Yosef Eliezer ben Tzvi Hirsch. Beatrice Pizer in memory of her father Yisachar Dov ben Shmuel. Stanley Presser in memory of his wife Chayaleah Bas Zev HaKohen. And this is not a dead person, this is living people. The children and grandchildren have made a contribution in memory of their parents and grandparents, Vicky and Larry Fish. And Judy and Michael Peretsky have donated a week of learning in memory of her mother, Razel Bas Yehuda Lev. That today's 23rd, somebody said?
Yes, 23rd.
All right, there are no other dead people today. Okay, on the bottom of Ayin Vav, we learned about this dialogue between Avner and Shaul, where Shaul was trying to find out how big a threat David was. And he sent Avner to the basement. And then a fellow named Doeg interrupted, and he gave all these challenges to the drasha that a male Ammonite or Moabite may not get married to a Jewish person, but a female may. They can both convert. It's a question of who can marry. So Avner goes to the base medrash and he presents the issue. King Shaul wants to know. And they say, Moavi velo Moavis, that a Moavi may not marry into the community, but a Moavis may. And Doeg, still making trouble, follows him into the base medrash on the top of Ayin Zion. And Ashke Lahu Doeg call Hani Kushaisa. Doeg repeated his argument to all the Chachamim in the base medrash, the Ishtiku, and they were unable to refute him. So immediately, a boy of Ruzeole. So Doeg wanted to conduct like a Facebook page and make trouble for David, say David is illegitimate. He wanted to announce in all the ways. In those days, one had posters, proclamations.
Twitter?
That
They didn't have Twitter?
No, they didn't have Twitter yet, and Musk didn't come along to mess it up. In any event, so he wanted to publicize this fact that David was illegitimate. He couldn't really marry anybody, and obviously couldn't become king. So miyad, instantly, there was a challenge to Doeg. So before we can talk about the challenge to Doeg, we have to identify who it was that jumped up and why the psukim give two names to him. So we're going to state first the psukim, and then we'll tell what happens, okay? Amosa ben Ish Shmo Yisra HaYisraeli. Amasa was the son of a fellow whose name was Yisra the Israelite. Asher Ba'al Avigal Bas Nachash. And this man begat the son, Amasa, with a woman named Avigal. Elsewhere she's referred to as Avigail, but here she's called Avigal, Bas Nachash, the son of the snake. So the Medrash identifies this as Yishai, and the reason he's called Nachash here is because Yishai never committed a single sin in his whole life, and he would have been roy to eternal life, but because of the Maisa with the Nachash and Adam and Chava, nobody could live forever. So they were praising him by saying, this is a guy who would have lived forever were it not for the Nachash. And of course, the Nachash part of that stuck, and that was his nickname. Okay, Uksiv, it says in another pasuk, Yeser HaYishmaeli, that the same Yeser was called not an Israeli, but Yishmaeli, the Ishmaelite. So why is Amasa's father referred to as an Israelite in one pasuk and an Ishmaelite in another pasuk? Omerava Malamed. So here's what happened. In the base Medrash, he was sitting there. Now we have to understand, he is David's uncle. Okay, he's married to David's sister. So he's David's brother-in-law. Whatever, he's a mashpacha from David. Shahagar cherbo ki Yishmael v'yomer. You sometimes you see in the movies, the Mexicans have the bandoliers. Everybody, each country had its way of putting on a sword. So this guy, Yeser, put his sword on like a Yishmaeli did. So they called him the Yishmaeli. That's not really his name. But anyway, so Rava says that he got up and he made an announcement. Kol mi she'enu shomei halacha zu yedaker b'cherev. Anybody that doesn't accept the halacha that of Ammoni velo Ammonis, I will pierce with my sword. I'll kill him. Okay? So, and he continued and he said, Kach mikubani v'beis dino shel Shmuel haramosi. Because I heard in a psak din from Shmuel, the Navi Shmuel, who ultimately is going to anoint David, that a Moabite can marry anybody. So the Gemara says, just a minute. You can Moavi velo Moabis. So the Gemara says, just a minute. Two things mitigate against accepting this. Number one, you don't paskin at the tip of a sword. Number two, there's a general rule. A new issue comes up. You can't say, I have a Messiah that such and such is the halacha. You never said that before, ever in your life. It never came up intellectually when you're learning the Mishnah. You now spring it on them at the tip of a sword. So that is not an acceptable deal. And Doeg's refutation should take a stand. So the Gemara, Mehemen, Ha'amar Rebbe Avar Amar Rav, Kol Talmud Chacham Shemoira Halacha Uba Im Kaidem Maisa Amra Shemoinan Lo. Any Talmud Chacham that wants to introduce a new halacha, if he introduces it in an intellectual manner, not Nogea Lamaisa, and we debate it and we accept it, and then it's applied halacha l'maisa, that's acceptable. The imlav, but if they spring it on us in the middle of a Maisa Shahoya Bezdin, ain't Shmin, we do not accept that. So Doeg looks like he may die, but he's got the upper hand. However, the Gemara replies, Shiny Hasam, Daha Shmuel Ubeistinu Kayim. We're not talking about some ancient tradition that he claims is a secretly whispered Rebbe to Talmud for a while. He's saying the Bezdin of Shmuel paskined like this, and if you don't believe me, give him a call. It's a standing Bezdin. Anybody could go and say, did you really paskin like this? And they would say, yeah, we really paskin like that. So this would be an exception to the rule because it would not have been newly drug up. It was actually brought halacha l'maisa earlier. Mikol makom kasha. Nevertheless, Doeg's issues are valid issues. And even though his intentions were venal, and even though we paskin Moavi velo Moavis, we acknowledge it's a bit of an issue, and that informs the story with Rus, where the closer relative says, this is an issue, I don't want to get involved. And Boaz says, no, I will get involved. All right, ad kan. Hacha Targumai, here in Bavel, we explain this concept that because the basic question was, I want to remind us that the Moab, when the Jews were coming out of Egypt and they were going into Israel near the end of the 40 years, they passed Moab. And the Moabites came up to put up roadblocks and did not offer them food. So we say because the men didn't offer food, they are the ones that can't marry into Judaism, but the women stayed home. You can't blame the women. And one of Doeg's objections was it would have been perfectly sneistic for the women to come and bring iced tea and cookies to the Jewish girls. They didn't have to stay home. They could have come out. So they try to justify the Moabitic women's behavior by mentioning the pasuk Kol Kveda Bas Melech Benima. Basically, women are supposed to stay home. The glory of a woman is to maintain a home, not to go out and work, not to go out into public. That only a few of them. That's why they were killed later. But we're talking at this point, all right? And there were also the Ammonite women. It wasn't just the Moabite women. And anyway, Rava back in Israel, Amrei the same Rebbe Yitzchak. Some say it's generally known, and some said it was only Rebbe Yitzchak who said, he pointed out Sarah Imenu stayed home. Omar Kra, the Amra love Aye Sarah Ishtecha. The angel said, we have a message for your wife. Where is she? And she stayed home. Okay, so that's two pshatim that help justify. Okay, now the Gemara wants to know if this concept, now remember the Mishnah said that there was an argument, I think it was Rabbi Shmuel who argued, okay? So Ketanai, Amoni velo Amonis, the male Ammonite may not marry into the Kahal, but not if the female may. Moavi velo Moabis, the female Moabite may, not the male. Divrei Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda said that. In other words, he limited it to those two outside cultures. Rabbi Shimon Omer, Rabbi Shimon, not Rabbi Shmuel. Rabbi Shimon Omer, Al davar asher lo kidmo eschem belechem b'mayim. The reason they can't is because they did not come out and offer bread and water. And darcho shel ish lakadem, etc. And that excludes women because it's the men's job to go out and greet strangers. Okay, okay. So Darish Rava tries to interpret from a kapitel Tillim. David says, "My diksiv." What does David say? Petachta lemoseroi. Literally, it means an act that the moserai are the straps that bind the yoke to the team of oxen. So David HaMelech is turning to God and he's saying, "You loosened my yoke straps." Omer David lifnei Kodesh Baruch Hu. David said over to God, Rabbeinu Shel Olam, Shnei Moseros Shehoyu Olai Pitachtem. There were two ropes, two straps that bound me. Now he's talking about his two non-Jewish ancestors. Okay, Rus Hamoaviyah, V'Naima Ha'amonis. These were two women that were in the Davidic line, these two non-Jewish women who, according to this Messiah, could marry. But he says by paskening and having Shmuel make the din and having the Beis Din accept it, you've taken this burden off my back, so to speak. All right, Daresh Rava, Mike Siv, what is the other pasuk, that another pasuk? Rabba Sasisa Atra Hashem Elokei Niflosecha Machrosecha Le'olenu. What, you've done a lot for me, God. Your wondrous things and your thoughts are for, it should have said, for me. You did a bunch of good things for me, your wonders and your thoughts. But it doesn't say for me, it says for leinu, for us. Melamed shahoya rachvam yoshev b'cheiko shel David. This teaches when Rachvam, his son, was sitting on his lap, Omer Lo, David said to his son, Alai v'alecha nemru shtei mikro'os halalu. For me and for you. In other words, for me and for the Davidic line after me, that's what these psukim are referring to. Daresh Rava further explained, Mike Siv, what is the meaning of the pasuk in Tehillim? Oz va'amarti hine basi Megillah Sefer Ksuv Alai. Behold, I came with a Sefer Torah written specifically for me. Amar David says, Ani amarti ata boisi. First I said that I came. V'lo yadati shebemegillah Sefer Ksuv Alai. But I did not know that in your sacred writings, there were psukim referring specifically to me. Hasam ksiv v'nimtzos, and then we saw in Bereshis it says they were found, or who was found. Hacha ksiv umatzasi David avdi b'shemen kodshi mishachtiv. And in Tehillim, I wrote, I found David and I anointed him with holy oil. So God is saying, I accept that psak, and David is right to be king. Omar Ula, Omar Rabbi Yochanan. All right, now we're going to go further into this business of the implications of not an Ammonite, but a female, yes, not a Moab, but a Moabite, yes. And we're going to discuss generational issues. But the first thing on the table is, what is the status of the child of converts, can that child marry a Kohen? Okay, a Kohen Gadol specifically. Omar Ula Omar Rabbi Yochanan, Bas Ger Amayni, Ksheira LeKahuna. The daughter of a male Ammonite who cannot marry a Jewish girl. He has to marry either a Shechva or a Geyores. There are a couple others, a Nesina, whatever. But they produce a daughter. That daughter can marry even into the kahuna. And we're going to see if the mother, if an Ammonite woman can marry any Jew, certainly her child is kosher, and her child could even marry a Kohen. We're going to see the discussion. Amarle Rava bar Ula la Ula. So Rava Ula's son says, I don't understand that. You got to explain it to me. Reb Yehuda, if you're telling this over based on a psak from Reb Yehuda, Ha'amar bas ger zocher b'bas chalal zocher. What about the fact that the daughter of a male convert should be forbidden to a Kohen because we're talking here about an Ammoni who illegally marries a Jewish woman. Now, we learned many times already that if it's only a lav relationship, it's tofes and the children are legitimate. But if an Ammonite man marries a Jewish girl, that's an illicit relationship to the extent he shouldn't have married her. If a Kohen Gadol marries a divorcee, that's an illicit relationship. He shouldn't have married her. The Kohen's daughter or son would be a halal or a halala. So why don't we make a similar analogy that the daughter of an Ammonite married to a regular Jewish girl is ke'en a halal, cannot marry into the kahuna. The Ikar Reb Yossi, and if you want to argue that the din is like Reb Yossi, Pshita becomes obvious. Ha'amar ger shenasa geyoires bituk sheira lekahuna. Only if the ger marries a geyoris, if that wedding is 100% kosher lechatchila, then the daughter can marry. Ger shenasa geyoris batuk sheira lekahuna. Okay, but if he marries illegitimately, should be not. So now Rava keeps talking to his father and he says, don't answer this, Tab, because I can knock that out. If you try to answer me by saying, Bahanach, dir unlovo bekahal, regarding the women who are allowed to enter the congregation, aval hai de'en roi lova bekahal, but the male Ammonite who could not marry a Jewish girl, that rule doesn't apply here. Menale, how are you going to make that distinction? The Yalif Miko and Gadol Balmana. We'll go back and derive it from the case of the Kohen Gadol marrying illicitly the Almana. Okay, and Ma Kohen Gadol Almana Shechen Boyosai Ba'avera, where the intercourse between the Kohen Gadol and the widow is considered illicit. Chalal yochiach, so the child is a chalal, and is no good. But here, the Ammonite marries another Ammonite. There's a perfectly valid marriage. That's not a problem. Chalal yochiach, so the chalal will prove it. Just the reason why the person is a halal is because his parents' sex in creating him or her was a sin. Kohen Gadol Yechiach, so the Kohen Gadol proves it. The Chazir Hadin, and you wind up going in circles. V'lo roi zeh k'roi zeh. And if you want to answer that they're not really analogous, that the Kohen Gadol and the Almana is not analogous to the Ammonite marriage, the lo roi zeh k'roi zeh, and the marriage of the Ammonite is not similar to the marriage of the Kohen Gadol that he's not allowed to do. Hatzad hasheva shebehen she'enu berov kahal ubito psula. What makes them similar? That in both cases, the male Ammonite can't marry anybody he wants, and the Kohen Gadol also can't marry anybody he wants. Afkan shenu berov kahal, so too by the Ammonite, he can't marry anybody he wants. Obita psula, his daughter should be forbidden. That's all the son to the tati. So now he continues, Ma hatzad shava, shebehen shechein yesh behen tzad aveira. I could upshlug by saying in both relationships, the Kohen and the Almana, and the Ammonite male with a regular Jewish girl, they have a sinful component. L'chatchila, they should not, marriages should not have taken place. Dilma, maybe, but Amoni Shinosa Bas Yisrael command. So maybe that only refers to where it is an Ammonite male marrying a regular Jewish girl. She doesn't know he's an Ammonite, or he doesn't care. He converted, of course. He doesn't care. He's an Ammonite. He thinks she's pretty. He wants to marry her. He asked his rabbi. The rabbi says, you're not allowed, but if you do, it's chol. So he figured, okay, so I'm a bidi evidika type yid, right? What about gav to be also avera? So even though their sex together is lechatchila sinful, bitok shera, maybe their daughter is perfectly okay anyway. So Ula finally gets to get a word in edgewise, and he says, Amar lei, he says to his son, and yes, that's the case. That even though the parents were married illegitimately, the kid is fine. Also, Ravin Omer Reb Yochanan, Ravin came and he quoted Reb Yochanan and said, Bas ger Amayni ubas Mitzri Sheni, the daughter of an Ammonite male and the daughter of a second generation Egyptian, so she's the third generation, okay, can marry anybody they want. For Rabbi Yochanan Aimer, Rabbi Yochanan said, Shera, they can marry even a Kohen. For Reish Lakish Aimer Psula, but Reish Lakish disagrees and said they're puzzled. So now we have to explain Reish Lakish. Reish Lakish Aimer Puzzle the Aleph Lo Mikoin Gadol Balmana. He does the hekesh between the Kohen Gadol and the Almana. Rabbi Yochanan Amar Kshera. Rabbi Yochanan says they're fine. Turn the page. The son of Rabbi Zakkai Kaimei the Rabbi Yochanan, because Rabbi Yochanan was present when Rabbi Zakkai taught them this next brisa. Ki im besula me'amav yikach isha. Look at the word me'amav. It has a mem. It could have said ki im besul. You could leave out the word altogether, or you could have said ki im besula amav, a Jewish virgin, yikach isha. Why does it have me'amav? That's going to be the question. Okay, lahavi geyores mikana. That includes a geyoras based on her yichus, meaning Both her mother and her father were converts. So she has perfectly good yichus. Her parents' marriage was kosher lagamri. An Ammonite man, maybe they were a couple before, they converted to Judaism, they remarried, now they have a daughter.
We don't believe in born again.
No. We have an Ammonite man converts, and when he finds out he's not allowed to marry a Jewish girl, he looks around for an Ammonite convert girl, and he marries her. Whether you say it either way, that's 100% kosher marriage. So that child should be 100% kosher. That child has decent yichus.
How could that child be called a ger in the first place?
What?
If the parents were converted to Judaism.
Then the child is a bas ger. The child's called a bas ger.
The parents are Jewish.
Yes, but there are issues like could she marry a Kohen? So you have to label her properly. Furthermore, her brother is different from her. Her mother could have married a Schwartz or an Abramowitz. Instead, she married an Ammoni. Her father could not marry a Schwartz or an Abramowitz. And Ammonite men are forbidden forever. So in this new family of two legitimate converts, the daughter can marry anybody she wants, even a Kohen, and the son can only marry an Ammonite or an Egyptian or a Moabite or whatever. So you have to label the children so you know what the halacha is. We're not discrediting her Jewishness. It's just like when your kids got married, or at least when my kids get married, they didn't do it. But when my grandkids got married, they had these resumes where they told who the bubby was and the zaidi was and the shul that you daven in and where you went to yeshiva. So people know your yichus. You have to know this stuff. All right, weiter. The Omer lay. So in any way, Shehuk Sheira Kahuna, and the girl could marry a Kohen because her parents' marriage was legitimate. The Omer lay, and Reb Yochanan then says to Reb Zachai, he speaks up in class, Amav may Amav. Anishaina, I learned it like this. Amav may Amav. The pasuk doesn't just say Amav, it says may Amav. Lahavi psula haba mishnei amamim. That would allow even a virgin daughter, this is talking about the Kohen Gadol, from two nations. What does it mean, two nations? We'll see. The at amat geyaris mikana v'sulo. You're talking about a convert from I'm going to paraphrase it all, from a legitimate marriage. I'm talking about a convert, even if the parents are from two nations. So one possibility means the Ammonite marries a Jewish girl, even though lechatchila he's not allowed to. Or we will see in a minute, maybe they're called two nations because the rules for the women are different from the men. So you could say a marriage between an Ammonite and an Ammonite lady, both of whom became Jewish, are called two nations because the dinim are different. Okay. My Shnei Amamin. So Gemara asks what I just tried to talk out. What does it mean, two nations? Elema Amoni Shanasa Amonis. If you say we're talking about a male Ammonite convert marrying a female Ammonite convert, my Mishnei Amamim. Why does it use the Lashon two nations? Tizcharim, Asurim, V'Nekevus, Matoros. They're different nations because men can't marry anybody they want, but the women can. Okay, Hainu Giyoros B'Kona. So then, if you're going to make that argument, then you're talking about a kosher marriage. Your yichus is fine. Ella Amoni Shanisa Bas Yisrael. So you have to say what we're talking about is a normal Jewish girl who happened to marry an Ammonite convert, and according to this brisa, it allows that offspring, if it's female, to marry the Kohen Gadol. So it disagrees with the previous brisa. And we see from here, Rabbi Yochanan is on the side that even such a girl could marry the Kohen. Okay. The Ikeda Amri, others explain the whole business a little differently. Amar Le, Rabbi Yochanan says to Reb Zakkai, Ani Shaina, I learned it like this. Amav me amav, Lahevi Besula Haba Mishnei Amamim, from a mixed marriage. Oh, Me'im Sheyesh Lo Shnei Amamim, and that even includes a nation that has a duality within it, meaning the men have different rules than the females. Va'at armat keyores mikana v'sulo. You say a woman whose parents are married perfectly legitimately and nobody else. So we see Reb Yochanan again is a broader view than Reb Zakkai. Lahachlishna. Now, if we're going to use the second version, then we're going to have to say that Reb Yochanan is allowing this girl to marry the Kohen. Bas mitzri sheni. How would you determine that? Remember, we have it with, unlike the Ammonites, Egyptians have to go to the third generation before they're not restricted in marriage. And we're going to discuss it, but we're going to see that the same rule applies to both men and women. So in theory, Mr. Egyptian marries Miss Egyptian. They have a kid. I'll call them Egypt 2. He marries a girl that he's able to marry, let's say Egyptia 2. And they have a daughter. She's Egyptia 3. She should be able to marry anybody, even a Kohen Gadol. But how do we know that? If we want to learn it, since we just said that an Ammonite who marries illegitimately, his daughter could marry a Kohen, halachas kama v'kama, an Egyptian who waits out is the 3-generation penalty, should be able to marry a Kohen. Mala Ammoni shenasa bas Yisroel shechein nekevas mutoros. But at least the Ammonite might be less stringent than the Egyptian, because even in the first generation, half the Ammonites, all the ladies, can marry anybody they want. So maybe they're not as chomer. Okay, so the Gemara answers, hold on. Mitzri shiny shenasa mitzri shniya yochiyah. The second generation legitimately married Egyptian to the second generation Egyptian lady is the proof that you're wrong, because their daughter is allowed to marry, not the second generation, only the third generation. Mala mitzri sheni shenasa mitzri shniya. How can you compare a legitimate second generation Egyptian marriage on both sides, shechein ein vaiso bavera, where no sin was committed in that marriage, to the Ammonite, where a sin was committed? Ammoni shenasa bas Yisrael yechiach. The fact that that marriage is illegitimate to the extent that it's a lav marriage should prove that you're wrong. V'hanach hadin, etc. Chazer hadin, and we go in circles again. So Omer Rav Yosef. So now we had both possibilities, both arguments of Rav Yochanan, and trying to prove it from this circular reasoning doesn't work, obviously. Omer Rav Yosef. Hainu dishmaina le Rav Yehuda de Omar. Now I understand what Rav Yehuda was talking about when he said, Amav Me'amav. In another pasuk, his nation, but the pasuk should have been, but it really says Me'amav, from his nation. V'lo yadana my kamar. I had no idea what he was trying to tell me, but now I understand it. Okay. Kiyasa Rev Shmuel bar Yehuda Omer, when Shmuel bar Yehuda came to Bavel, Hachi Tana Kameh, this is what Reb Zakkai taught Reb Yochanan. Isha Amonis Ksheira, an Ammonite woman who marries a Jew or a non-Jew who became Jewish, her kid is 100% kosher. Bna ba'amoni puzzle. But her son, if she marries an Ammonite male, is not kosher because the male line passes forever. Ubita ma'amoni kshera, but her daughter's fine. B'med dvorim amurim, what are we talking about? Ba'amoni va'amonis sheniskairu, where both parents are converted Ammonites. Avo, bita ba'amoni psula, but her daughter from an Ammonite is puzzle. Now, you're wondering, she just said she's kosher, now it says she's puzzle. Internally, it's contradictory, we know that. Okay. Amalei, as soon as Rabbi Yochanan heard Rabbi Zakkai say that, he says, Puktane lebra, get out of here. Go teach that brisa in the gutter somewhere. That brisa is not a valid brisa. And now they went, and now people came to him and they said, Rabbi Zakkai is a chashuv guy. You were very rude to him. Why'd you throw him out of the yeshiva? So he explains. My the Amat Isha Amonis Kshera, when he said an Ammonite woman can marry anybody, Amoni velo Amonis, she's right based on Amoni velo Amonis. Beno me Amoni puzzle, when he said that the daughter of an Ammonite man is puzzled to marrying a Kohen. Okay, that's also correct. Vaha Amonihu, because her son is an Ammon. Okay, Be'abina Amoni puzzle. Her son is restricted in whom he can marry. That's also right. Ha Amonihu. He's an Ammonite descended from an Ammonite, and that restriction applies forever. Ubita ba'amoni kshera, when he said that the bita is a kosher girl, the daughter of the male Ammonite, no matter who he married, would be kosher. Lamai, what does that mean? If you're saying she can marry anybody, that's superfluous. You don't need that. Her mother could marry anybody. Obviously, she could marry anybody. Okay. Hashta imakshera. Her mother was perfectly fine. Obviously, she's fine. He, but me boy. Why do we have to ask if she is born to a Jewish mother? In other words, the Ammonite cheated and married a regular girl. Elala kahuna, what would be the only possible restriction on that girl? Marrying into the kahuna. B'madvarim amurim, when do we say that? Ba'amoni va'amonis sheniskairu, when both the man and the woman convert. Avalbita ha'amoni psula, but the daughter then from an Ammonite is unable to marry a Kohen. My bita me amoni, what are we talking about? What's the definition? Elema amoni shanisa amonis, if you say an Ammonite girl marries an Ammonite man and they produce a Jewish daughter. Mikono. That's a girl who's a geyoris with a decent yichus. Ella Amoni Shanisa Bas Yisroel. So you have to be talking about the legitimate marriage of the Ammonite to the Jewish girl. So Omar lay, and then he said she could not marry a Kohen, and the truth is she can. That's why I threw him out. Omar lay Puktani Lebra, so I threw him out. Now we mentioned Egyptians. Mitzri v'Adaimi, Einan Asurin, the Egyptian and the Edomite are only restricted for 3 generations. My tshuva, so how did we upshlug? Remember, back in the Mishnah, Rabbi Shimon said that they also should allow the women immediately. And he gives a Kal V'chomer. It's Kal V'chomer, even though an Ammonite may never marry in, the girls may immediately. The Egyptians who can marry in the 3rd generation, sure, how much more so their women should be able to marry in immediately. That's his Kal V'chomer. So my tiyufta, how do you upshlug that Kal V'chomer? Omer Rava bar Rav Chana, Omer Rav Yochanan Mishum de Ikala Meimar, you could say the following. Arayas Yochichu. You can prove it from Arayas. The din of Arayas. Reuven has a child. Reuven's child has a gorgeous daughter. Reuven may not marry his granddaughter. That's an Arayas. However, if the granddaughter produces an even prettier great-granddaughter, Reuven is allowed to marry the great-granddaughter Min HaTorah. We learned this at the beginning. Only Midrabanan, they said, no, that's